News show for June the 20th, sorry, March the 21st, 2023. And I have the legendary, one of the greatest weathermen that ever existed in the history of South Florida, Mr. Craig Setzer. Hashtag Setzer says. How you doing, sir?
Good, Alexander. Thank you so much for having me on your show. When you said legendary, I started to look around. I thought, who is he talking about?
Well, we're gonna the viewers are gonna see why you're legendary with this interview. If they don't know who you are, they're gonna know who you are today. Let's get first intro for the Alexander News Show, and then your intro. Hey, I have some questions to ask you. I'm with the Alexander News Show.
Who are you?
Alexander Carlos, Alexander News Show. How you doing? I'm a Trump supporter. I'm pretty sure you saw the intro. That's Mr. Joe Carollo, who doesn't like me very much. Anyways, now we're going to do your intro. Let's get that going. Ladies and gentlemen,
I need to incorporate that into my channel.
Well, I gave you the secrets behind the scenes. And if anybody wants to get that, they have to figure it out for themselves. So, Mr. Craig Setzer, for ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, this is Alexander News Show for March the 21st, and we are live. It's 8:03 Eastern Standard Time from Miami, Florida, USA, South Florida. And it is a beautiful weather day outside. And we have the weatherman, the original weatherman, old school, Mr. Craig Setzer. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well, very well. And I'm honored and privileged to be here. Thank you so much for even thinking of me.
No, thank you for being on the show. Because, Mr. Craig Setzer, you are a busy man. And now, with hurricane season coming, you're going to be much more busier. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, and then I'll do some stuff about the show. Who inspired you to become a weatherman? That's the first thing I wanted to ask you.
So I don't think there was any one individual. My father was a scientist. He was a metallurgical engineer. He had a PhD. So, I kind of was exposed to really smart people. And then I was into science. And then one summer there was this big thunderstorm and I thought, whoa, this is cool. Here's lightning and thunder, damaging winds, torrential rainfall. And I thought this affects and impacts everybody. And I thought at that point, I was probably like 8 years old. I'm like, I'm going to be a meteorologist.
Wow. Is there a particular weather person from back in the days that you look at and it's like, wow, this dude's a legend? Is there a particular weather person?
So I'm going to reveal probably how old I am, which is very, very ancient. But back in the day, there was a guy on ABC, Good Morning America. His name was John Coleman, and he's retired in Southern California now. But John Coleman did the national weather, and he wasn't afraid to throw some science up there. He would show the radar, and he would talk about, wind shift and these things that most weathermen back in the 70s wouldn't talk about. So I kind of thought, you know what, you can do the weather and talk about science as long as you explain it, and people will follow you.
Awesome. I remember you from when you were, I think you weren't, it wasn't just CBS 4. You were in another news station. What was that station at?
So I was in Tampa.
You're in Miami.
Yeah, in Miami, I was always at CBS 4. Brian Norcross hired me in 2000, and I ran into him at a conference, and he said, "Hey, you ought to come to Miami. You might have some fun down here." Because, he was very serious about the weather. He had a reputation. That was just right after Andrew. And so he brought me on and I learned a lot with him. But, you just have to go through a hurricane to really learn a lot. I mean, it's like the school of hard knocks, right? That's why I always tell people, if you haven't been through a hurricane, find somebody who has and make them your best friend during hurricane season.
Absolutely. And now speaking of Andrew real quick, perhaps the biggest hurricane, the most deadliest hurricane that ever hit South Florida. Where were you when Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida?
So I remember vividly, I was working in Colorado Springs. It was 1992, of course, and I was going to head head to visit my grandparents, and the plane continued on to Miami, and I knew the storm was out there. It was the middle of August, and I thought, should I just stay on the plane and go on to Miami? Probably my career would have been even more into hurricanes. Because I didn't really come here until 2000 into South Florida.
Wow. So yeah, I remember very well. I mean, I was a little brat back in 1992. I mean, we were 3 weeks. I grew up in the east side of Hialeah. I think you know where city of Hialeah. They
Of
call it
course.
in Spanish La Ciudad que Progresa, city of progress. And we were 3 weeks without electricity. 3 weeks. It was terrible, but that hasn't changed much. So, what? Let's talk first about hurricanes. What are the things that people need to do to prepare for hurricanes? I mean,
So,
this is like a broken story. Like, oh, okay, we all know. But then when the big hurricane comes, it's like nobody's prepared.
right, right.
What do you
So
have
I
to
think
do?
the main thing is the way we think about hurricanes. It's not like anything else. It's a marathon. And so your preparation needs to be little by little, step by step. So at the beginning of the season, I just check things. I check to make sure my gas cans are good. I check my generator, make sure it could start if I needed it to, and just the basics. And I kind of have a plan in the back of my head. And then, of course, when there's a threat, then we ramp up our preparations because it's always easier to stop preparing than to try to play catch up with preparing. So I don't think most people understand that it's a marathon. You know what? You're going to do a little bit this day, a little bit the next day, a little bit the next day, and hopefully the storm turns and we don't have to continue to prepare.
And with the hurricanes, how many days do you believe, in your honest opinion, should you be prepared? Like have supplies. How many day supplies do you need?
Right. So I have about 5 days on most of my supplies. But I mean, I'm kind of one of those MacGyver type that
Yeah.
if I need water, I'm going to drain my hot water heater.
Okay.
Stuff like that. But I like to think 5 days is good because usually by about 5 days, what you're trying to do is just hold out until help arrives. You're not trying to just stay there if your house is destroyed. You're just trying to get through a few days until help arrives, and it arrives in numbers.
So in South Florida, if, for example, you live in Homestead, is it obviously recommended that you evacuate if the hurricane's going to head that way?
Right. So the thing that we try to do, and South Floridians are great at it, is we want you to evacuate from the storm surge zone. And we have designated evacuation zones here. It's bigger in Miami-Dade. It's more coastal and smaller in Broward and Palm Beaches. And the Keys, of course, it's usually what we call a tiered evacuation with visitors going first, and then it moves on up the chain if it's needed. But I would say if you live in the evacuation zone, you just have to get out of the evacuation zone. You don't have to go to Orlando. You remember what happened in 2004? Orlando was hit by Charlie, Francis, and Gene. Orlando had more hurricane wind days than any other place in the state. So you just have to get out of the evacuation zone proper.
And that would include also Miami Beach. Would that include also Pinecrest as well? Palmetto
So,
Bay?
yeah, parts of Pinecrest, like over by Cutler Bay, call it Cutler Estates, things like that. Those areas would be in the evacuation zone. Now, parts of Pinecrest are in the evacuation zone, but I think what we're going to see is they've redone the storm surge model, and it
Yeah.
looks like it's not going to go as far inland. So we'll have to see when they rerun it, and maybe we'll even see some new versions of the storm surge evacuations zones this year. But I think the evacuations are going to get smaller. Still, like if you're in Miami Beach, like you say, you're going to have to evacuate. But like zones B and C and those deeper zones are probably going to be less likely to evacuate beginning this year.
So how far east in the east coast of Miami-Dade County and Broward, how far east do you have to evacuate to be safe?
So typically, of course, the barrier islands, which includes Miami Beach, all the way up. If you live east of the Intracoastal, if you live on A1A, typically you're the first level of evacuation. And one of the reasons for that is because sometimes the bridges could be damaged and help couldn't get to you if you needed help after the storm. And then after that, it kind of begins to go up based on how far or how close you are, say either to Biscayne Bay or the Intracoastal, and how low lying you are, or if you live on a canal or something like that.
So when does hurricane season officially? And I hate this. This is like I I get I get nervous when hurricane season is official. It's like it's nerve wracking. But I have to ask because everybody in South Florida needs to know when does hurricane and in Florida actually when does hurricane season start?
So it officially begins June 1st. The National Hurricane Center starts putting out their tropical weather outlooks just to let you know a heads up if there's anything out there. That begins May 15th, or it could happen if it's a special case before that.
Right around the corner.
Peak, right? The peak of hurricane season that we usually have to be most ready to get through is August, September, and October. Especially October, South Florida has the highest number of major hurricane landfalls in October. So I'm usually ready by August, and I cancel all my vacations. I don't have any vacations, August, September, and October, and I just stay here, and I'm always watching and ready.
So everybody is going to now, especially with the new wave of digital media. People are going, and even wait for this interview. A lot of people who know you are. I mean, come on, Mr. Craig Setzer, you're a legend in this community. South Weather TV. Come on. I mean, and you for a very long time, they're going to tune into your YouTube channel, which is at Craig Setzer 9726. All the information is below the screen right here. By the way, what is the prediction for hurricanes? Like, how many big name storms? Who did the predictor? By the way, how many hurricanes are we expecting?
So, of course,
and how accurate is it?
No pressure here, right?
No, because
unfortunately,
whatever, it's not going to be. A lot of times they get it wrong, but it only takes one big storm. Right. Look at Ian. That's it. It ruins everything.
Right. That's exactly right. And unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, I mean, it's beautiful, during the winter here, but we live, I like to say, on the number one pin of Hurricane Alley, and the chances that big bowling ball is going to clip us, they're higher than just about any place else in the country. So I always tell people, you know what? This is the culture you have to embrace. We live in South Florida. We have to always be ready for hurricanes. It would just be like telling somebody who lives along at Lake Erie in New York, upstate New York, is it going to snow this year? Maybe, maybe not. No, it always snows. It's always cold in the winter in upstate New York. And there's always a threat for a hurricane here in South Florida. So we always have to be ready. The forecast itself doesn't start coming out for about 4 more weeks. That's when we start to see the initial seasonal forecasts.
Do you care to predict?
You know what? I learned a long time ago, the best way to stay humble as a meteorologist is to try to predict a hurricane season.
So what is the difference? And does it play a big part? La Nina and El Nino. Would you please explain that to the viewers of the Alexander News?
So La Nina and El Nino play a very big part with respect to hurricane seasons. La Nina is when the water in the Pacific Ocean near the equator is cooler than normal. It typically causes lower wind shear in the Atlantic and the Caribbean, and then we see more hurricanes. And in El Nino, typically there's warmer water in the Pacific and near the equator. There's more wind shear in the Atlantic and the Caribbean, and typically we see fewer hurricanes. Now, of course, you can still get one, and if it hits you, it's bad. But typically the number of hurricanes goes down during El Nino. Right now, the forecasts are calling for El Nino to start to come back this summer.
So we want El Nino.
Right. That's right.
We want El Nino forever, not La Nina forever.
Right. El Nino, though, the downside of El Nino is we have very stormy winters when there's an El Nino. Most of the tornadoes we've seen here during the wintertime happen during an El Nino year. But you know what? I mean, it's always a trade-off, right? That's the weather. One thing goes one way, something else is going to go in a different way.
But we in Miami and along the East Coast of the United States, you would definitely agree with me. We want the El Nino.
Yeah. I
We'll
would
take
say,
the El Nino any day.
I'd say the El
So,
Nino is the preferred way to go, right?
yeah. So, real quick, Alexander News Show. Okay, you can subscribe. All the information's below the screen here. It's all on all the social media platforms, and also, I was going to mention if you want to donate to the show, just Alexander News Show on WhatsApp. I just want to throw that out there. And if you want to comment, please, and you have a question, please, for Mr. Setzer, please ask the question, or you can text the show. Again, the information is down here. And Mr. Setzer, let's get into climate change without the politics. Because, of course, when you start talking, you get into the politics, it creates a lot of division. So we don't need to get into the politics.
Right.
Tell me what's up with this whole climate change thing? What is your opinion on the climate change, in your honest
So,
opinion? And by the way, before I go any further, we're on podcast as well. Alexander News Show. This interview is right now being put on podcast platforms. So mainly Spotify. So you can listen to this interview later on if you want. You don't want to look at me. You can look at Mr. Setzer, but you won't look at me. You don't have to. You can listen to the podcast later. That's what's great about digital media. So anyways, let's talk about the climate change. What's your opinion about it?
So first, I think we just have to agree that we have to take care of our planet. I mean, we can't just treat it like a garbage can. We can't just dump stuff into the atmosphere or into the oceans. I mean, and we've gotten better here in this country, but it has to be a worldwide thing. I mean, we're all connected because we're on the earth, right? So so first off, we just have to we can't just forsake the planet. Second, I'm all for renewable energies and things like that, but I think most people don't realize the scale of what it requires in terms of solar and wind to make up for our current energy usage. And also, I think we've got to have what's called a base load. And a base load means generation of power so that when the wind doesn't blow and there's no sunshine for days, everybody can still do the minimum they need to do. And then if on top of that we use renewables, I think that's great. But I don't think we can just sacrifice all of our energy sources just for renewables alone. I'm a proponent of nuclear. I know people are like, "Oh, nuclear," but
We've never had a nuclear disaster ever. And I've been in
not
Miami for 46 years since I was a
not
baby.
here, right? Right.
Never.
But it's clean, it's energy efficient.
Cuba would never dare fly a plane to Turkey Point and bomb Turkey Point. That would be a disaster for the island of Cuba.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I mean, I think it's pretty safe. And, in the next 20 years or so, we're going to have newer forms of energy. So I think that in my opinion, I think our future, our outlook is positive. Now, are the oceans rising? They are. They've been
What's the
rising.
number one reason why?
One reason why is because the Earth goes through these cycles, and the Earth has slowly been warming since the last what they call the Malter minimum, which was a sunspot minimum in the 1680s to 1700s. And so the Earth was cooler then, and it's been warming. When the Earth warms, the oceans expand, the water gets warmer, and the oceans expand, and that raises the sea levels. You can find shells. I mean, all the way up almost to Disneyland, because at times the ocean's been higher. I don't think we'll see that in our lifetime, but the ocean's also been lower. It goes up and it goes down. So my other big thing is that we need to remain adaptable. People will say, "Oh no, I live on Los Olas in Fort Lauderdale, or I live on Alton and 15th, and it floods a lot." We can mitigate against that on Miami Beach. But the water's rising, and it's been rising according to the Key
That's
West
because
records
the
since
planet is warming. The
1913.
planet is warming, right?
Yep. Yes, it's warming.
So how much is human to blame for the way the world is? I mean, obviously there's some blame,
Exactly.
but how much blame should there be for global warming?
So that's the big question, and you nailed it when you said that there's some contribution, right? We are impacting the weather in some way. I don't think we know exactly how much we are impacting it, because I was talking to a friend, and they're like, modern medicine doesn't know as much as you would expect about the human body. We're just talking about like a person. Imagine the whole planet and all of these processes and feedback mechanisms. It's very complex. We're influencing it, but I don't think we're influencing it as much as some would claim.
So to be fair here, a lot of it is and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm ignorant when it comes to this. That's why I have you on the show. A lot of it is the Earth warming, right? And it's also humans causing a little bit of it, global warming, right? Or and so is that fair to say?
I believe so. I think so. I mean, a simple example is, if you look at a picture of Miami International Airport in the 1930s, it was 2 runways and and the Everglades. And now look at it. I mean, you've got 836 and 826. You've got warehouses. You've got Doral. You've got Westchester. You've got so many areas that hold the heat. So we're definitely influencing the heat, the weather there locally. And there's probably some contribution all globally to what we're doing in the atmosphere as well.
Do you believe that all this smoke to these factories, especially in China, that blows into the air, you believe that it affects us?
Well, we'll see, and that's the thing, right? I mean, let's say we go to what they call net zero, which means we don't have carbon emissions. China and India are still the largest contributors, so we can't do this alone. I mean, it's right that we're doing it, but it's not going to fix it if we are contributing to the warming by us just stopping.
And it also includes not polluting the oceans, not polluting, I don't know, the lands or something. I mean,
Right.
What is your opinion in regards to that? Does that also play a part?
Yeah, I mean, there's this huge thing in the Pacific Ocean, which is trash floating around in a circle in the middle of the North Pacific, and we have to. We can't do like apparently we did over the last century, where we just we use kind of the Earth as our dumping ground.
Is the global warming but real quick question in regards to this: is global warming and climate change the same thing?
So
that's a little bit of a stupid question, but I wanted to ask you.
No, there's no stupid questions. I mean, originally the climate was warming, or at least the prediction was for the climate to warm, and it was warming. And but then there were some events where it was colder than normal in some places, and there were these big cool downs. And so I think to better craft the message, they couldn't just call it global warming because maybe people were freezing in Siberia or Canada or something, and in the northern U.S. And they, you can't say global warming. People would be saying we need more global warming. So they kind of changed the terminology there to just kind of incorporate everything.
So to get to this other question and what's happening or what's going to happen in the West Coast, because we're still sticking with the global warming and climate change. I guess it's the same thing, right? Same thing, yeah. Global warming, climate change. There's this big grass. I'm pretty sure you're well aware of, but I want to say something in Spanish real quick because I got Spanish viewers. Si ustedes, este es Craig Setzer, uno de los mejores meteorologists que ha asistido en la ciudad de Miami. I hope you understood that. I don't know.
Muchas gracias todos.
Yes, and lo tenemos en vivo. Y Craig Setzer trabajó para el Canal 4. Era el lead meteorologist de Canal 4 de hace mucho ya tiempo. Y él ahora tiene su propia compañía. Tiene su propia compañía y vamos a hablar de eso ahora dentro un poco. Pero bueno, we're with Craig Setzer, legendary weatherman. He's the chief meteorologist of CBS for Miami News. Also an Emmy Award winner. Él ganó un premio Emmy, Mr. Craig Setzer. And let's talk about the and this everything in Spanish is below the ticker right here, guys, just so you know. If you want to find us on, si quieren encontrarnos nosotros a mi programa en social media, está aquí abajo y también en el ticker de Craig Setzer, que yo también voy a poner información rapidito. What I wanted to ask you was, please explain what's going on. This huge grass that's popping up on the west coast of Florida. For what I read, it's pretty terrible. And
so there's several things that are out there that are kind of impacting us. One is the Sargasso Sea produces this Sargasso grass, this seaweed, that's coming up on the beaches. And then on the West Coast, there's the red tide, which is typically a result of when there's a big hurricane in the Gulf, like Ian. It stirs up the water so much and the ground and the underwater levels so much that they have these red tide algae blooms. So these are bad things. We know that the red tide has been around for centuries. Even in the 1800s, ships reported it in the Gulf of Mexico. Excuse me. So we're not contributing to the red. We might be contributing to it, but we're not making the red tide. The algae blooms, or the I think they call them cyanosis or cyanitic. It's basically the blue-green water that we are contributing to. That's from putting pollutants into the water. Lake Okeechobee, when they discharge through the Caloosahatchee and other areas, then we do create some bad things there.
How bad is it going to get with the situation that's going to happen in the west coast of Florida? I don't believe it's going to affect us here in the East Coast, right? Or am I wrong?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty bad. I want to say it was last year that it was pretty bad on the West Coast, and I think it's going to be probably as bad this year. I don't know if you saw any of those pictures right after Ian, but all the water coming off of Florida made this big brown, like streaming cloud coming into the Gulf. That just kind of makes things worse.
So how can you get rid of it? Is there a way to get rid of this?
Not that I know of. I mean, I know they've been working on it for years. Marine scientists, marine biologists have been working on it for years, trying to figure out ways to get rid of that. I don't know how you get rid of that red tide. The cyanosis blooms, that's probably not the right word, but basically the blue-green algae, that we can control. We need to, that's from phosphorus and things we dump into the Everglades for fertilizer output.
And it's terrible for the tourism industry.
Yeah, it doesn't help.
It's going to impact it big time. Would it be dumb to blame any one political figure for this? It doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican. Right. Would it be dumb to blame really a political figure for this? Because I just want to throw this out there. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to get too political here, but I want to ask you this because people here tend to blame certain political figure. Oh, it's his fault or her fault.
Right. I think it's unfortunate when we blame certain political figures for things that occur naturally, number one. And number two, when we blame political figures who I think have made some efforts. I don't want to mention names, but recently I think it was $4 billion went to the Everglades Restoration Project. I mean, these are good things that we're doing. And you may not like somebody for the other things they're doing, but if they're doing things that are pro-Florida and pro, the environment and stuff, I think those are good things. It's funny because when you swerve into the political lane, right now what I'm doing is I'm doing what's called forensic meteorology.
Yes, we're going to talk about
with attorneys.
I want to talk about that.
And the thing I've learned is that when they're asking you questions, boy, don't get out of that. You never get out of that meteorology lane. I'm always like, that's outside of my expertise.
Yeah, I wanted to throw this. So tell me a little about. Let me see if I can put it right over here. Tell me about your new enterprise. It looks very exciting. I did some research on it, and aside from you being a former chief meteorologist at CBS 4 News Miami, an Emmy Award winner, that's very hard to get. Extremely hard to get. You got that. You weren't a nominee. No, you won an Emmy. Now you're in the private sector. You're running an enterprise called Setzer Weather LLC. Mm-hmm. Aside from the fact, ladies and gentlemen, by the way, you can go to CraigSetzer.com. You can go to his YouTube channel. I put some of his live streams on my channel. You can check that out. But you can go to Craig Setzer 9726 on YouTube and on the Twitter, Craig Setzer. You can find him there. So all the information is down here. But please tell me a little bit about your private enterprise. Sounds exciting.
Yeah, so I had done TV for 37 years, and I just felt like I really wanted to focus on the on the meteorology, the weather, and TV felt like it was kind of going in a direction that was taking a little bit of the weather decisions out of my control. That's kind of the proper way to put it, right? Okay. So I decided to just to leave after 22 fun years, and I'm thankful to CBS for the 22 years. that I had there, but I decided to go a different direction. And so now, besides the YouTube channel, and I appreciate all the promotions you're giving, Alexander. That I mean, I feel
No,
like I should
I
do a
thank you for
commercial for
coming on
you.
the show because it's
But
hard to get a legendary weatherman to be on the Alexander show. I mean, that's hard.
well, you're
But
a good guy, so I mean,
no, thank you. But
no
tell
problem
me,
doing it for you.
tell me what impact can Setzer Weather LLC do for the community?
So I don't know. Hopefully, I can help the community in some ways. I mean, what I've been doing is that if, like, say, a storm damages your home and the insurance company doesn't pay, then it might be the case where you have to get an attorney, and then the attorney contacts me and says, "Craig, did Jose's house have roof damage on this date from a storm?" And I will go through and look at tons and tons of data and find out what the weather was. I don't sue anybody. I don't do any of that. I'm just trying to, like, find pieces in a puzzle and putting together what the weather did. So I'm no longer forecasting in the future. Now I'm kind of looking back and saying what the weather did.
Well, this show, the interview that we're doing today for March the 21st, is going to be on podcast, mainly with Spotify and there's other platforms. Estamos nosotros también en podcast. Y perdona que no puedo hablar tanto el español, pero bueno, por lo menos tienes toda la información aquí abajo de quién es Mr. Craig Setzer. Buenísimo, buenísimo weatherman. And before the show ends, are you doing any subbing? Like, I think I saw that you were still going to different parts of the country. And how's that work for you?
So it's kind of funny. I mean, I did it. Somebody contacted a friend who called me and said they need somebody in Huntsville, Alabama. And I'm like, Huntsville,
Wow.
Alabama, Northern Alabama. I showed up in my suit and my tie. And fortunately, the morning guy gave me kind of a rundown of where the things are to talk about, because otherwise, I don't know Northern Alabama. There's the Shoals, there's the I-65 corridor, and there's Sand Mountain. That's all I knew from what the guy said. And I just started doing it. But I think my TV days are just about done. I'm having too much fun doing the YouTube, talking to people like you, and doing my consulting business.
This is, look, nothing against radio, nothing against TV, but the reality is it's dying. It's a dying media. The future is this, what we're doing right now. The YouTube channel, the podcast, which, by the way, I'm pretty sure that in the very near future, you're going to be doing your own podcast if you haven't done it already. And
I'm going to take tips from you. You've already, before the show started, you gave me some good pointers.
Absolutely. And before we'll close the show off, and then I just would like to have you for a couple of more minutes, off screen. But podcast, that's the future. People want convenience. People don't, back in the old days, you had to wait until 11 o'clock at night.
Yep.
And I love the good old days, but you have to wait until 11 o'clock at night, and then you got to look at the TV. And there's no way. And I know that DVR came and boom, boom, whatever, but this is the future. Digital age, digital media. You know who I like very much, and he got away. He did exactly the same thing you did. Brian Andrews, great human being, by the way.
Yep.
And he told me, "Welcome to the new wave of digital media." He told me this a couple of years ago, when the Surfside collapse occurred and stuff. And hey, one question: what do you think? Do you think weather had anything to do with the Surfside collapse? If that's okay, if I can ask you that.
Yeah, you can ask me. I honestly don't know. I didn't see any of the
because they say that the sand caved down on the building and knocked.
I don't know. I know a lot of structural engineers looked into it. There's even like forensic geologists that sample the ground and look for stuff like that. But I'm not aware. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you that question because they're still doing the investigation in regards to that. And some experts were saying that climate change might have played a role in the collapse of the Surfside Towers, which is terrible. It's a terrible day in Miami-Dade County history. Mr. Craig Setzer, I like I said, I remember you from when I was a young dude on TV. And I mean, from the days of Bob Soper.
That's right.
And the days of Bob Weaver.
Yep.
I
Long
mean,
time.
even Brent, I think it's Al Franklin or Ben Franklin, but he was on Channel 7 News. I don't know if you remember him. Mr. Franklin. You remember him?
Barely. You know who I remember was Bill Kamal.
Yes. It's sad what happened with Bill Kamal. He was a good weatherman,
He was a good weatherman.
but it's so sad what happened to him. And then after Bill Kamal, then Roland Stedham came. I think
Mhm.
Roland Stedham was the one that came in. I remember TV news from back in the day, and nothing against CBS 4 or CBS or NBC 6. I grew up watching Channel 7.
Everybody did, right? If you lived in Miami, you watched Channel 7.
Sally Fitz. You remember her, right?
Yes.
Sally Fitz.
Yes.
And then I saw Steve Dawson and then Rick Sanchez. No, it's crazy, but this is the new media. So, ladies and gentlemen, Craig Setzer can be found YouTube, Craig Setzer 9726. His channel is awesome. You need to check all his weather feeds. Twitter at Craig Setzer. He's always posting there. It's like a radio station in itself, but digital radio. And his website, craigsetzer.com. Mr. Craig Setzer, sir, is there anything else? By the way, what university did you go to?
So I went to the University of Oklahoma because I thought I was going to be a tornado chaser, and I used to chase tornadoes.
How's that? How does that work? How scary is that? What's the feeling?
If it's coming towards you, it's pretty scary. But most of the time, the thing you're most scared about is the hail, which can be huge, and also lightning. I always was afraid I'm going to get out of the car to video a tornado, and lightning's going to hit me.
I mean, you gotta be. It takes guts. I'm not gonna say the bad word, but it takes guts to chase tornadoes. I mean, what states did you chase tornadoes in? What was the state? The most state?
Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska.
Did you do it alone, or you did it with another person?
I did it mixed. Sometimes I do it with another person. Sometimes I do it alone. It's a lot of driving. Sometimes you see something. Sometimes you don't.
You don't do that no more, do you?
My 18-year-old son wants to do it now, so I might have to rent a car and head out west.
Following in his dad's footsteps, Mr. Craig Setzer, sir. Thank you, Mr. Greg Setzer. Gracias por estar en el programa de Alexander News Show. Thank you for being on the Alexander News Show. And this is going to be on the podcast, va a estar en el podcast. Like I said, there's no bigger legend in the weather community, TV weather community, whether it's now he's in the private sector, than Craig Setzer.
De nada. Muchas
Thank
gracias.
you for being on the Alexander News Show, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Give me a second. I want to talk to you off camera, but thank you.